The Search Podcast USA Edition series is sponsored by PGC. PGC are the longest serving employer of record in North America and can compliantly engage contractors across both the US and Canada on behalf of staffing and recruitment businesses. Our turnkey solution offers a unique access point to the largest staffing market in the world. To find out more, visit us at pgcgroup.com.
Hi everybody, welcome to another episode of the Search Podcast. I'm Elliott Manning. This week I've got a very, very special guest with me to talk about the US in a bit more detail. Neil, I'll let you take it away with an introduction.
Well, thank you, Elliott. It's a real pleasure to be here with you. My name is Neil Carberry. I'm the Chief Executive of the REC, the UK's professional and sector body for recruitment and staffing. And I'm also a member of the board a member of the board of the World Employment Confederation, which is our global body on which I serve with my good friend Richard Volquist of the American Staffing Association.
Oh, fantastic. I've heard his name pop up quite a few times, so I'm assuming he's basically what you do, but from a stateside perspective.
He's me in the United States, yes.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
he, although much taller, I have to say, he's in the way that everything's bigger in America,
Absolutely. Everything, in every other way. Yeah, for sure. But look, let's start this off, Neil. We'll kick it off in terms of going through your view and your take on the recruitment market in the United Kingdom. And why do you think businesses are expanding over to the States? I mean, this episode is all about the US, as you know, sponsored by PGC, talking about everything America. So what's your take on it at the moment?
So let's think about the UK market and what businesses growing in the UK are experiencing, right? If you believe the ONS, there are about 30,000 recruitment agencies in the UK. I'm a bit of a skeptic of that number because a lot of those are single-handers doing very specialist work.
Correct, yeah.
In terms of sort of chunky businesses, maybe let's talk 5,000 to 6,000, enterprise level and bigger with a few staff. The UK market has some unique facets. One, it's grown up in a relatively permissive regulatory regime. We don't have licensing. We don't have controls on the use of agency work. It's generally a very pro-agency work market. Secondly, it's a market that's explored niche provision really, really well over the last couple of decades. So people are finding a niche and competing in it. And then thirdly, because of the scale of competition, it's quite an innovative market in lots of ways in terms of use of technology, but also in terms of use of things like offshore back officing and so forth. When I'm feeling flippant, I say that I think Ahmedabad's maybe the 5th or 6th biggest UK city in recruitment now. But there's a development there driven by the competitiveness of the UK market that means that companies that are being successful in the UK have upped their game. If you get to a certain point though, where just getting a bigger share of the pie in the UK is only one way to grow. And for any business, small, medium-sized, larger businesses looking to expand, especially post-Brexit, because now there are the same sorts of barriers in the way to growing in Europe as there are to growing in the US, it's a natural move to be looking at other countries where there isn't a language barrier, where there isn't a regulatory barrier that you're unfamiliar with. And the US is obviously front and center in that just because of its sheer scale as, genuinely the world's leading free market economy.
Absolutely. And do you think that like the US market would be in demand nowadays as it had been, because I feel like since everything kind of happened with COVID, the US market has taken off. Everyone's kind of trying to find more opportunity over there. Do you think that would have been the case pre-COVID, if that never happened and it would have still gone down this direction?
I think Brexit will have driven it a little bit because you remember how the great growth of IT provision in Germany from the UK that happened pre-Brexit. I think Brexit slightly reorientated people's thinking. Of course, the language barrier thing makes a big difference. So I think it's probably happening despite COVID. But having said that, one of the things we know about the US, I'll put my wonkish economist hat on now. The US economy is hugely robust and resilient, and has a capacity for renewal driven partially by the dollar's reserve currency status, driven in part by some of the the kind of federal funding that we see being unlocked now by the current administration on infrastructure, on AI. These are big investments where there's a bit of jam available to spread
Yeah.
widely. So that there are reasons, probably post-COVID, to be looking at the US that are driven more by federal and state government policy than anything else. And you see that in terms of, I think pretty generally now, economists in the US are whispering about a soft landing from the inflation spike, whereas of course here in the UK, things as we speak, Elliott, are looking a little bit more concerning.
Yeah. Do you think that they're going to implement any kind of legislations and laws from a staffing perspective in the US, like they've done, with regards to, the change of GDPRs over here, for example, or within the European side of contracting, where it made it a little bit more difficult for UK firms to do more contract over here. They started then going over to Europe. Do you think there's going to be anything implemented?
I think this is a really good question to make a core point about the United States, which is we think in terms of a single jurisdiction for employment law, even though Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, when they're there, are devolved. Actually, of the four nations of the UK, only Northern Ireland actually has devolved employment law and devolved regulation of agencies, and they've never really used it to any great state. So we think of the UK as one country when it comes to recruitment and staffing legislation, and we think the same of France and Germany and so forth. Really, really important for people going into the United States to understand that there are 50 regulatory regimes.
Yes.
And the regulatory regime in California is radically different to the regulatory regime in Florida.
Yeah.
And you can see that a great example of this, not from our world, is net neutrality.
Yeah.
So net neutrality was struck down as a principle at the federal level a decade or so ago. It still exists. It exists entirely because California passed a law requiring it in California, and California is big enough and robust enough in the world of the internet to actually set the standard, not just in the US but globally. So we should think about it that way. So if you're supplying in New York State, in California, you are going to see a bit more of that European regulatory pressure. If you're supplying in Texas, there's a bit more of a free market at work, and of course that affects US companies as well. So there's a different demographic and nature to the markets in each of these countries. British companies will recognize the kind of big city market of somewhere like New York. Absolutely. They might not recognize the market. I mean, I was over in Miami at an SIA event in March and chatting to some fantastic people from Nebraska, but the market in Nebraska looks a lot different to maybe what we're used to in the UK.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. And that's why, there's farms that would prefer to be in the likes of North Carolina to then being in Texas for different reasons, and New York and LA, etc. And there's other things as well. And for those that need more information, please feel free to ask me. But you need to have a license to trade in certain areas as well, especially if you're in New York. And if you're an employment business from a contract or temp perspective, you've got to have a certain license for that. And then the same within the permanent side of supply, you've got to have a certain license for that as a staffing business. So there's a little bits there that I don't even think businesses are even aware that exist. But there are going to probably, as you're right, be different things and legislations, etc., in multiple states that they need to really look into and do some research on.
Well, at the REC just recently, we put in a business partner who is about helping. Probably the wrong choice to use a cricket metaphor for this chat, but everyone's watching the Ashes as we. It's kind of it's about how you roll the pitch for what you want to do in the US, and it is what's my niche that I can break into, because niche always sells. It's which area of the US do I think the potential is in, and thirdly, it's do I think I have an understanding of what I need to be able to trade in that jurisdiction, and not think just about what comes from Washington, but think about what comes from the state capital as well.
Yeah, there's a lot there, and there's other things that I've been told about, and have to tell a lot of business owners that I work with that you need to look into, and they wouldn't know, and you've got to be careful, because as much as you go around these things or don't even know about them, they can come back and bite you on the backside at some point, if you're not careful.
Well, and lots of British companies will have been beginning to learn this in terms of,
Yeah.
trading in Europe, in terms of what can you go into Germany to do versus what can't you, what provision can you make cross-border under the TCA, and you need to think about the US as exactly the same framework, although largely for the US we trade under the WTO framework.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Do you see many businesses from the US coming over here rather than it always being the other way around at the minute? Do you see a lot of United States businesses opening up in the UK?
I don't see a lot of startup activity in terms of US businesses coming here, and we always need to remember that the kind of the relative sizes of the two economies. In terms of, the US is the powerhouse of the global free market for us in the UK. Looking to us from the US, the UK is one of a group of major industrial trading partners. But you could be looking at Germany or Spain or Japan or any of these other markets as well. Australia, obviously, a very big staffing market as well.
Yeah.
What I do see is interest in investment in the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
So perhaps a bit less now because the path is uncertain. But I anticipate it will come back as the market stabilizes again. Certainly through the last couple of years post-COVID, I've seen a lot of appetite from investors in the US to look at the UK market as a place to be. And if you think about, leave aside the size of the economies and just go to the size of the staffing markets, it's the US, then it's Japan, then it's us.
Yeah.
So the UK market is enormous in terms of the global industry, as the World Employment Confederation data shows. So it's natural to want to play in it. What stops US firms putting a toe in the water is the scale of competition.
Yeah. So
that's both our defense and an issue in terms of attracting investment. I do think we will see more interest from US firms, especially as their market moves more niche as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, there's a big market here. I've had a couple of businesses in the States that have then expanded over to the UK that I've been aware of, and naturally they've done it just purely from a talent perspective, and their clients in the US have got offices and headquarters over here as well, and that's kind of like, the whole vice versa.
Really common way that it happens, actually, when people, particularly when both ways, but particularly when people come from the US to the UK, it's because they have those, and Elliott, the sales relationship in the US is even more relationship based than it is in the UK. That sense of, I can solve your problem in Chelmsford as well as I can in Charleston.
Absolutely.
That's often the pathway that firms follow when they come eastbound across the Atlantic. There's a bit more prospecting coming from the UK, where I think a firm feels it has a niche and it can exploit that in other markets where that niche is in need.
Definitely. Do you have any advice from your side and on businesses that are thinking about going over to the States right now with their business model and their plans? Things in the UK market have been a little bit slower from some perspective in certain areas. Do you think that you would still encourage them to do that, or anything else?
Look, I'm in favour of exports from the United Kingdom generally. We've got to drive the growth of our economy somehow. It's something that I and the other heads of the trade association have been working on really hard through the spring in terms of trying to push the government into a more far-sighted economic policy, which must rely on trade. And for recruitment businesses, that's getting out there and working abroad. I think, for me, if you're looking at the States from the point of view of a recruitment business, it's one, how do I go narrow rather than broad? So I want one niche and one I want one niche and one jurisdiction to start with. And I want to feel like, ideally, I want a client who's with me here to follow me there. Great example here. Lots of REC members up in the Northeast, what I would call the Northeast, not what you'd call the Northeast. I don't mean Newcastle, I mean Aberdeen. We're doing oil and gas, and a lot of those project guys in oil and gas, the recruiters are here, but actually they're working in Nigeria, they're working in Texas, they're working in Kazakhstan and places like that. So those kinds of businesses in engineering, in IT, they have really good potential. Healthcare is another one, which, travel nurses in the US is a big sector.
Yeah.
It's a big sector here as well. And you see, one of the biggest players in the UK market is backed out of some US investment. So there's a lot of potential growth there. The thing that I think is interesting in the US that we probably haven't quite picked up on yet is, how do you integrate platforms into your work as a recruiter? And there's some really good examples already happening in the US. Aya Healthcare is one off the top of my head, where platform integration has enabled some quite exponential growth. Now, do I think that growth would happen at that pace in the UK? Possibly not, because there's more progression in the tech stack already in the UK, but there's a lot there about kind of, do I have the tech for where the client and the candidate are going to be, not where they've been in the past. So that feels like quite a lot, but it boils down to choose a narrow enough target, be able to deliver
100%.
it, and be able to deliver it digitally.
Yeah, I think that's important, and a lot of business owners on their business plans need to make sure that they're very strict and straightforward in what they're trying to achieve and where they want to achieve it and how they want to achieve it. But you're right as well, and I spoke to a firm recently that the way that the US operation is set up is not the same necessarily as the UK. So from an integration perspective, there are their own challenges, and if they expect it to mirror what they've got over here and to over there, it's not always the same thing, and it's not always going to be the case. So there are those differences. And last question for you, Neil. Keen to understand, I guess, where you see the next upcoming markets being in the world. You just said yourself you just got back from Geneva. Where do you see recruitment companies putting their focus? Is it UAE, where there's they're in its own bubble over there, or elsewhere?
So I think there's a lot of immediately there's a lot of opportunity in the Gulf. And you see that, and even when I was in Geneva last week, you saw a kind of greater sense of integration into that global debate coming out of the Gulf. I think in the short to medium term, it's there. I think it's in some of the underserved European markets as well, especially as Europe as a whole, including United Kingdom, is facing a bit of a demographic tightening over the next 5, 10, 15 years. That one of our big messages for client businesses is, don't think that this tightness of the labour market you're seeing in the UK is a short-term post-COVID thing. We're looking at this for a while. And of course, to a certain extent, that's kind of an opportunity-filled market for recruitment and staffing. In the medium to longer term, and this is where my voice is on the WEC board, I look at Nigeria, Ghana, Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda, and the sort of growth that some of those countries in Africa have the capacity to drive over the next 5, 10, 20, 30 years. Very young population, developing fast, jump straight to kind of the mobile telephony world that we've got now. For us as an industry, that group is those countries are massively underserved. And the path out of informality into formality, the kind of proper development of an industry, too early for a British firm to be thinking about now. But in a decade's time, I think big British firms will be looking at, what am I doing in Nigeria? Yeah,
absolutely. Do you know what? I feel like, and this is my opinion, a lot of businesses look at the attractive locations, the locations where they may have been on holiday or can go on a weekend away, like places that they feel that they believe are built up and have that attraction to it. But where
there's a lot of people in the Australian industry, Elliott, who have accents very like ours. Let's put it that way.
I can exactly. And I think there's a lot of places out there that have got more of a business opportunity that people were not going towards. South Africa being the same thing. There's a few businesses that have really taken advantage of South Africa as an area to set up another office and a business base. And they speak their first language is, that's technically what we speak in a sense. So there's a lot there. So
I had a great chat with the Indian Staffing Federation recently about what can the REC and the ISF do together, and it's exactly that. So much capacity there.
I went to an event recently, and the SIA were running it, and they were talking about the data and statistics of where they can see the growth and areas and countries on there that you wouldn't even think of have taken over. I think India being one of them and being one of the biggest. But again, not enough businesses are attacking it as an area for themselves.
Yeah,
that's what I've noticed.
And starting with, what can you get done in India in your back office? So you use some of these outsourcing arrangements. You're not doing it to save money, because if you approach outsourcing primarily to save money, it will just destroy your service offer. If you approach it the right way, there's some high quality stuff there.
Phenomenal.
That you can improve efficiency in your own business with.
Well, that's why most industries use it. That's why the IT and tech industry they create a platform over there to utilize it more, whereas recruitment industries question it for some reason, even though their clients are all using it. So yeah, no, exactly. Neil, look, it's been a pleasure having you on here. I really do appreciate your time.
Anytime, Elliot, real joy.
No, look, and anyone that's got any questions for Neil would like to know a little bit more about the market, REC provide all the information that you need. They've got a fantastic membership offering at the same time for those as well. But ultimately, if you need anything particular, just reach out to Neil. I'll do an introduction if need be. And look, there's a lot of informative stuff on these podcasts. The US is not always the only place in the world that people can go and set up, as you've heard on this. So feel free to explore and do your research and look into it. But again, thank you so much for your time, Neil. And
absolute pleasure.